pleased to welcome you to our presentation today in our ongoing 2018 CCOVI lecture series. This afternoon we are proud to present Dr. Janet Dorozynski, who is the Trade Commissioner for Canadian Wine, Beer, Spirits and Tourism at Global Affairs Canada. She oversees a programme that supports Canadian embassies to serve and promote Canadian beer, wine and spirits internationally. Janet obtained a PhD in social demography from Concordia University in Montreal, where she taught politics, government and business relations for 5 years. It was while writing her dissertation she decided to turn her growing interest in wine, beer and spirits into her full-time career. Well, you would, wouldn't you, really? Janet holds the WSET Diploma in Wines and Spirits, is a WSET certified educator and a professional affiliate here at CCOVI. She has worked in and with the Canadian and international wine industry and has studied, tasted, taught and written about the wine industry for 2 decades. Every year, Janet tastes thousands of Canadian and international wines and has been judging at wine and sommelier competitions in Canada, the US, Europe and South America since the late 1990s. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Dorozynski, and I'd like you to join me in giving her a warm welcome. Thank you.
I have been working at Global Affairs Canada since 2004, and when I started, I was hired to set up a program to help our embassies purchase and serve Canadian wine, which evolved into working with the wine, beer and spirits industry on international development and export, which has also evolved or along the way sort of transformed into also working with our embassies and ambassadors on using their table and official hospitality to promote Canadian wine, beer, spirits and food to raise awareness of what we're doing. So also about a year ago, I had tourism added to my portfolio. So in the course of my day job, I work with the 2 major entities in Canada that focus on international tourism, that being Destination Canada, which is our national marketing organization for international tourism marketing, as well as, now I only know the acronym, the government department. I think it's Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, ISED, who are responsible for tourism policy. So today's presentation sort of focuses on all the things that have been rattling around in my head for the past year as it relates to promoting Canada, Canadian wine and food from a tourism perspective, but also is informed by what I've been doing for the past however many years I've been at Global Affairs, and just, you know, what we've seen and heard and why it's important, I think, to use Canadian wine and food and beer and spirits, but CCOVI is more a wine thing, so we'll limit it to wine and food for today, to use it to create this awareness of our country that people might not otherwise have. So I guess I should start on the presentation because I don't have all day. So this is what I'm going to talk about today, and the first 2, Culinary Diplomacy and Gastro Diplomacy, relate to some of the things I was talking about, what we as a nation can do and what we as a government can do, which also fits into wine and food tourism. I'm going to talk a little bit about how people perceive Canada in terms of wine and food. And then I'm going to look at a specific case of Australia, who has been very successful in, I mean, they were already well known for wine, but they have sort of branded themselves in the past 5 years as a wine and culinary or wine and food destination. And it was interesting to see how they've done that and why they did that. And I think there are some lessons to be learned for Canada. So I will talk about that as well. So I'm going to throw out some terms and what it means, because just so that you know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about these things. But so culinary diplomacy is quite broad, and it's basically, you know, winning the hearts and minds of people through their stomachs. And it's a very old tradition of either winning over your enemies through food and wine, or once you conquer your enemies or are trying to rebuild peace with your enemies, to do things over food and wine. And that's an integral part of diplomacy. It's a subset of public diplomacy or cultural diplomacy, and this is when I spoke earlier about what we do in the department. I know there might be this perception that, you know, why would we have official dinners and events, but I'm sure it's not hard to imagine that even though you can be in meetings all day or negotiating free trade agreements or whatever, but when you sit down for dinner at the end of the day, people tend to let their guard down a little bit, or people tend to really, you know, loosen up a bit. And then you can really sort of get down to making deals and successfully making deals that way. So it also relates to using food and the table, and that's very broadly speaking, to tell a story of, you know, who the country is and who we are and how it relates to our culture and history and our traditions. So gastro diplomacy, which is related, and if you follow on Twitter, there's someone who has their username is Gastro Diplomacy, and there's someone Cultural Diplomacy. And anyway, I've tweeted out some stuff and I've been corrected. The Gastro Diplomacy guy has said whenever I don't know, I sent out an article or something and I said, oh, this is a great example of culinary diplomacy, and he said, no, this is actually gastro diplomacy. So there are subtle differences. Of course, they're very related. And this sort of relates more to, I mean, it's used in a political sense, but it's also more from a policy sense of a country. So how do you use your food and wine to tell people about your country? And the examples here are countries like Thailand and South Korea and Peru, who actually, if you look at, and we don't have time to get into that today, but if you look at what they've been doing over the course of the past 2 decades, the Thai government actually worked and supported the Thai diaspora who went out, encouraged them to open up Thai restaurants, and so that Thai food became pretty much ubiquitous now, to raise awareness of Thailand as a middle power, but also to get people keen on Thai food and then get people to go to Thailand as a tourist destination. So there's a very circular relationship here. Yes, it's not inked to tourism, but anyway, so it's a form of edible branding, which is linked to tourism and food and wine tourism promotion. Pardon me. So if we look at what's been happening from the perspective of food and drink, and someone referred to this as the Bourdain Effect after Anthony Bourdain and his many food series where he goes and whatever, eats bugs and, you know, eating and drinking all over the world. But it really fits into what's happening right now in terms of the motivations for travel and tourism. And food is very linked to a sense of place of a country. And, you know, this past weekend I was with a group of sommeliers from the UK and Sweden who were here, and we were tasting, but we were also eating, of course, and all of them were very impressed by the food that they had in Niagara, as well as the wine. But it was very interesting because one of the meals we were having beets in a dish, and a French sommelier who works in London, who is of half French and half Singapore descent, he was eating the beets, and he was like, this guy's 28 or something, he was like eating lots and everything. But we were just talking about the food, and he said, oh yeah, I love beets. I always forget that I like beets so much because it reminds me of when I was a kid, and when we went to public school, we would have these awful beets as, as part of our lunch, and I hated beets for the longest time. And I said to him, you know, I grew up eating beets. I'm of Ukrainian descent, and we're all about the root vegetables. So, I mean, food is very much related to your culture and history, and I think more and more people, when they travel, it's not only about sightseeing, sport tourism, ecotourism, hiking, whatever. I think many people, and there are data that we'll look at in a few slides to back up the fact that this is a very integral part of why they travel to places and what they want to experience. And food is actually the only thing, whether you're motivated to travel for food or not, but it's the only constant for anyone who travels, because you have to eat when you travel, right? So, and as you can see here, it's big business. Globally, tourism itself is big business. In Canada, it's big business and growing even more. The federal government just introduced their new federal tourism strategy to double the number of tourists coming to Canada by 2020. But as you can see right now, we still have pretty significant revenues that come into the country as a result of tourism. And I guess just, you know, we're talking about Canada in this presentation, and one of the things, I mean, that I've seen, and you've probably heard, and you probably all have your own thoughts, but I think, you know, if you talk to people out there, and it relates to what I was saying about the sommeliers who have come here and other ones that I've met along the way, that, like, people don't really know that we make wine. They don't know that we have this culture of cuisine and cooking, and that we have this amazing cuisine in not just places like Niagara, but in cities and elsewhere, because we're still sort of, you know, I think sometimes the image of what people have of Canada is still back in the 50s, and it's, you know, maple leaf and Mounties and moose and the 4 M's, as I call them. So I think to sort of get over this, when and if we do any sort of food and drink tourism, and in terms of rebranding our country, what I often hear is, you know, it's so hard to talk about Canada as a destination for food and wine because we don't have a national cuisine. But if you really look into that, like people say, oh, French and Italian, Chinese, whatever, it's not really a national cuisine. Like, can you think of one single dish or even a handful of dishes that represent France? I mean, Italy, maybe pasta, but pasta is made in like 1,000 different ways from wherever it comes from in Italy, red sauce, white sauce, no butter, olive oil, whatever. Chinese food, of course, is very diverse depending on where it comes from. So I don't think Canada is any different from any of those other countries because we have different regions. We have, you know, different things are produced in different regions. We have, pardon me, we have a huge amount, waves of successive immigrant waves that have come into the country that have transformed and changed what food is in Canada. Last night, had dinner at Backhouse, and I don't know if you've been there, but if you see how they advertise their cuisine, and they actually call it cool climate cuisine. I remember seeing that when I was there last time, but it sort of refreshed my mind last night. Which is, you know, if you think about it, it's sort of like lots of foraging and sort of northern roots, berries, game, whatever, which is pretty much what Scandinavian cuisine is about right now. And Scandinavian cuisine is, you know, super trendy, and everyone wants to go to Norway and Denmark and all these places and to eat at Noma if you can get in and afford it. So anyway, I think that's what we have to start thinking about. We can't wait until we come up with a definition for Canadian food, because it really is everything, just like, and you'll see this when I talk about Australian. Australian food is pretty much everything, and Australia has a similar history to Canada, although I don't think they have even as many immigrant populations as we do. But, you know, a country that was based on immigration, people came, brought their food and wine traditions, same with New Zealand, same with South Africa. And I mean, there are some, you know, there are some traditional dishes from each of these countries, but basically now it's a mix of everything. And, you know, I have not been to Australia, but I just keep hearing from everyone who's gone there, you have to go to Melbourne. Melbourne is like the food city to go to, and it's all about the food and everything. So I think we have lots to work with. We also have, you know, we're not just maple syrup, salmon, ice wine. We have all kinds of great wine. And again, to refer back to my little trip this weekend, the sommeliers, I mean, some of them, they had tasted Canadian wine, ice wine certainly, but some had tasted table wine. But I think, you know, they, like anyone else who comes here, are really surprised by the range of wines that we do, and in Niagara, and also I work with BC and Nova Scotia and Quebec, so there's just surprise across the board, but pleasant surprise, because we're making all these great things that the rest of the world doesn't know about. So, so yeah, just, you know, people travel for wine. People want an experience. They want to taste wine all the time and eat. That's the Bay of Fundy, the table dinner where the tides, you can eat where the tides go out, which is, I mean, that's a pretty cool thing that we can do, right? It's the highest or the biggest, whatever, tidal pool in the world, and when the water goes out, you can have a meal there or have a picnic in the Okanagan at Quail's Gate overlooking. And then, of course, you can take pictures of all your food like everyone does, and post them and talk about them. So food and drink tourism itself, it's not really super new, but it is growing more and more in importance, say over the past decade or so. It's also a term that, and again, we don't, like, I don't have enough time to get into all this kind of stuff, but if you're interested, there's the World Food Travel Association that has a great website, and they talk about, you know, what food tourism is, the challenges of food tourism. They just released their 2017, or they call it 2018 report, I guess, and they talk about the trends that they've seen happening in food tourism over the year, and what some of the trends are for 2018. They're based out of Portland in the US, so it's US focused, but they do talk about globally. And they, in their most recent report, actually say that there's still a lot of confusion over what the term means, because you know, for a while everyone was calling it culinary tourism, but then people backed away from that because culinary tends to sound a bit snobby. Gastronomic tourism sounds snobby. Gourmet tourism sounds snobby. Food and drink tourism, whatever. So anyway, there's a million terms. They kind of mean the same thing, and basically they're all about the pursuit of unique and memorable eating and drinking experiences. And if you look at the literature as well, one of the reasons why food and drink tourism has taken off, it's also in response and a reaction by travelers who you know, who are concerned about globalization and the standardization of food and the proliferation of chain restaurants and fast food. And for them, again, the people who are interested in traveling and learning about a culture and a region are really interested in tasting the food, going to a farm, going to a winery, you know, harvesting their own lobsters and cooking them and doing all that kind of stuff. So it's the time right now. Again, a couple of quick definitions about what food tourism is. Food and drink tourism, or whatever. Well, this is food tourism, actually. So basically, you know, not just restaurants, but also producers, food festivals, anything that basically motivates people to come to a region or a destination. And again, the pursuit and enjoyment of unique and memorable food and drink experiences, both near and far. Because the term is also not used just for people who travel to Canada from wherever, the UK or the US, but there's a whole sort of discourse around food tourism that would relate to, you know, people living in the region, like people in Toronto coming to Niagara as part of a sort of food and drink tourism or exploration. And I know that's something that the wine industry in Ontario is very interested on developing even more, because we have all these great things in our backyard, and we get people coming from US border states, people come from Ottawa, from Montreal, whatever, but Toronto, tough nut that it is, there's still, you know, lots more that can be done to get people to come to Toronto. So this is from the World Tourism Association. You can find it on their website. It's part of their food travel monitor. And I think in here there are some really interesting statistics that if you look at, you know, 59% of respondents, and it was survey research, of course, but 59% of respondents believe that food and beverage is more important when they travel now than when it was 5 years ago. So that's a huge increase. All about buying local. Somehow I can't do this, my eyes are so bad, but all travelers, the blue part in the middle, 82% of travelers spend more on food and drink when traveling than when at home. So even if people are not splashing out and if they're eating at home all the time, I mean, this is the people who are motivated to eat and drink will spend this extra money. And, you know, if you look at pardon me, what Canada is trying to do, and Destination Canada focusing on the 10 markets that we focus on. I mean, the US is still our biggest market, and a lot of this is overnight or day travel, cross-border travel by people who live in border states. But the real sort of emphasis and drive and what we're trying to do as a country is to get the long-haul travelers to come here, to stay for, you know, a good amount of time, eat, drink, stay in hotels, spend money in our country. That's what it's all about, right? Support the wineries, support the restaurants, support the local tour operators, hotels, everything. I mean, there's huge economic benefits to a region or a city due to food tourists and food and wine travel. So, and again, I mean, millennials are, you know, there's still a lot of food and drink tourists that are, whatever they call them, Gen X and baby boomers. But we see more and more, it's all about millennials, right? They travel, they eat, they drink. They're the ones who are Instagramming everything. Like, you can't walk 10 seconds without them taking a photo and posting it somewhere, which is great because it's, you know, if they're excited about something, they're sharing what they're seeing. And when they come to a place like Canada, that's what we want them to do, is share their experience of what they're doing. So again, just going to, in the literature, since I am in an academic institution and I don't actually do such I mean, I read about this stuff, but as Belinda was saying, oh yeah, you've done hundreds of these presentations. When I was an academic, I did, but I haven't been an academic since I got distracted by wine about 15 years ago. So anyway, similar to food tourism, wine tourism, the same. It's not only about visiting wineries per se, but also festivals, you know, anything that happens in the wine region, essentially. And again, it's, you know, it's directly related to the development of the region. And one of the things about wineries over and above food tourism and what happens for a restaurant, I mean, restaurants can still have a local population base who support and are their clients, but the interesting thing for wineries, as we all know, is that, you know, there's that cellar door sales, which is the most lucrative form of revenue for them. If you can sell through the cellar door, you keep all the margin that you would have to give away if you otherwise were selling it through the LCBO or to licensees to restaurants. So again, in the literature, Canada is, according to people who study this stuff, so it's interesting to put it out there for your knowledge as well, that we are considered a major wine tourism country for an emerging wine region. I don't think we're seen as an established, you know, wine region on the level of most of the old world or even Australia or New Zealand for that. But so we're in there with Croatia, Greece, Austria, Hungary, and Romania. Romania to me doesn't fit in there, but whatever, that's what the academics are saying. So that being said, even though we are a major wine tourism country, I think what we also need to point out and recognize is that we do actually have a very mature and established wine tourism infrastructure. Because if you look at Niagara, the Okanagan, even small regions like Nova Scotia and parts of Quebec, I mean, we have these great clusters of wineries in each region. We have well-posted wine route signage, cellar doors that are open, cellar doors that are not just inviting you in to taste and try their wine, but that are now building restaurants or putting, you know, bed and breakfast or hotels or all these kind of things. And as we know, since it's January and it's Ice Wine Festival in Niagara, I mean, these are also what's been happening, or this is also what's been happening in terms of the development and the extension of the wine tourism season in Canada. By, you know, not just having people come in the summer, but having them come spring and fall. But in Canada, where it makes the most sense, because we make ice wine, and everyone loves to pick ice wine, even though they're not doing it in the middle of the night, but really good. But it's a great way to extend the season and keep things going. So again, just, you know, all the regional wine associations have all kinds of, you know, the Wine Country Ontario travel guide, there's maps and apps and trip planning tools and everything. So we're quite developed. I mean, you know, if you compare us even to a place like most regions in France or Italy, I mean, wine tourism is not really even a concept in France. Like, you can go visit people, you can call producers, but, you know, now we're starting in Bordeaux and Champagne and a few other regions. There's a wine route and you can go, but it's nothing like it is in Canada, where you can just, you know, plan this on your own and go. And it was funny, a couple of years ago, I was in France traveling around with some people and Americans, who of course have a very developed wine tourism infrastructure as well, especially in California and places like New York State. But all the Americans I was with, we were going to a bunch of French wineries, and they were writers and whatever, and they kept asking the wineries, so do you have a tasting room, and how much do you pay, and how much does it cost, and what are your hours? And you could just see these French winemakers were just looking at them like, well, we don't have a tasting room. You're in my living room right now. This is where we taste wine. We don't charge you. You have to call to make an appointment. So it's just, I mean, it's not bad, and that's how they do. And most of them will, if you call them, and if you're interested in their wine, they will invite you into their living room to taste their wine. But it's just a very different model than what we have set up in Canada and in the new world. So, and in addition to the wine associations themselves, they work more and more with the provinces, so provincial destination marketing organizations, regional organizations, and as well as, I know, you know, the wine country Ontario, or WAMO. You know, we'll also work with like Toronto Tourism, so that when they have lifestyle media coming in or food media coming in, you know, to bring them to Niagara, because it's an hour away and it's part of what we're doing in the region, and they can, you know, either write a story or a sidebar, and it makes sense to coordinate and collaborate. So the benefits, there's lots of benefits. I've mentioned some of them already. Just overall revenue for the region, economic development for the region, cellar door sales for wineries. I think also, you know, it's the whole thing about once you have people in your winery, you can create an ambassador for life, or someone who keeps ordering your wine and goes to the tasting room or goes on a cellar tour, and, you know, whoever is leading it, whether it's a staff or they run into the winemaker or whatever. And then they have that story to tell their friends. I mean, when I was becoming distracted by wine, when I was writing my dissertation, I was actually living in Belgium. And so I would go to France a lot, and not on formal wine tours, but just calling wineries. And but that's how you learn, and that's how you develop this lifelong connection with a region, like, you know, the Loire Valley, because I went there all the time, and you meet the people and taste the wine and buy the wine, and yeah. So, but now I only drink Canadian wine. So, anyway, the challenges, you know, as I mentioned, we have quite a few players in the room, so sometimes it's not always the easiest to collaborate the vision of a destination marketing organization, a wine association, and government, especially when government is in the room, because, you know, a region might have, you know, they want to develop themselves as a sports or ski or whatever, and even if there are wineries there. So it's always, you know, a bit of, you have to make sure that everyone is kind of getting on the same page, and they understand that if they do coordinate and collaborate, that there are benefits for all of them. And then there are other things like regulatory and environmental issues which relate to traffic congestion. I don't know if any of you have been following what's been happening in the US, in Sonoma and Napa, where, I mean, you know, there are regions that are overrun with wine tourists. Napa is, you can barely, you know, get through the main highway of the region because everyone is out there, and it's really taxing on the infrastructure. Sonoma is limiting the amount of, you know, you can't have a restaurant in a winery in California, and that's related to, I guess, having people stay there and drink more and whatever. So there are challenges. I mean, none of these are insurmountable, and I think, you know, if you can have a sustainable vision for food and wine tourism, but you just have to, you know, make sure that you're thinking about it, and some of the, you'll get the benefits, but there are also going to be things that you have to think about. And again, I guess, you know, like any policy or issue that tends to be a bit, I mean, it's easy to measure the economic impact of something like wine and food tourism, but there are all kinds of other benefits to a region that you can't really so readily measure, like when people become enamored with your winery and tell their friends and they tell two friends and whatever. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that is always harder to capture, but it is part of the equation. So anyway, it's a challenge. It can be done. So as I said, I have been intrigued by what Australia has been doing in terms of food and wine tourism. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with their campaign, but in 2013, they started looking at, they did research in each of their 15 key markets that showed that the people coming from these markets were both, wine and food tourists, and that it was very important in their decision-making to choose which country to come to. And Australia, like Canada, a lot of people, I mean, I don't think this way because I just think about Australia for food and wine because I'm not going to go surfing or whatever people go there for, climbing Iris Rock. Anyway, but, I think that's, a lot of people go to Australia for the outdoors and surfing and the outback and all that kind of stuff. But, so anyway, in conducting this research, to capitalize on this growing trend for global food and wine tourism, their research found that of people who had never visited Australia, only 26% of them did not associate Australia with food and wine, or food and wine destination or offering. But when they interviewed people who had gone to Australia, that Australia was ranked very highly for its food and wine experiences. And it was a comparison between, having gone to Australia and the other places they went to. So it was right in between France and Italy from the countries, the markets that they were looking at, which are mostly in South Asia, North America. But that's a pretty compelling statistic that once people had gone to Australia and had eaten and drunk the wine, that they rated it so highly as a food and wine destination. And then drilling down to the research here, visitors from China, the US, France, blah, 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 ranked it as their #1 destination for food and wine. And again, it goes back to this whole thing about, I don't know, going to eat in Melbourne and going to the wineries. And anyway, I think this is very interesting and something that could be easily replicated in Canada. I mean, of course, we have a different climate. We have, there are factors that are not exactly the same as Australia, but I think it's similar enough that we could be doing something like they're doing. So the case study and the initiative, which was called Restaurant Australia, and it was launched in 2014, a lot of money. So these things, tourism is not cheap to encourage people to come to a country. It's also something that's evolving. It's not about, putting up billboard ads or giving out brochures or anything anymore. It's about, it's both paid and earned media and advertising. It's a lot of social media. It's sort of content, user-generated content. But to do all these kinds of stuff, you have to have a lot of money to do it. So anyway, they were pretty slick and savvy about what they were doing, and they basically wanted people to see Australia as being the world's greatest restaurant. And, in addition to a campaign based on these 7 pillars to bring the culinary experience to life, focused on wine, people, food, wine trails, produce, restaurants, experiences, and events. They also worked very closely with their local food, so chef community and wine community, and they brought in a lot of foreign chefs to do pop-ups, both within city centers, which were foodie city centers, but also within the wine region, so creating a real buzz. Again, just, I don't, Noma from Denmark, that restaurant came and they did a pop-up in Australia for, I don't know, 9 months or whatever. I know the Fat Duck, which is a very famous restaurant from the UK, when they were renovating their restaurant in the UK, instead of just staying in the UK and not doing anything, they actually took their whole staff to Australia, and they had a Fat Duck pop-up there as well. So these are the kind of things that, you know, it'll bring people, it'll bring tourists to your region, but it gets your local population really excited about the culinary and wine scene in the country, and it's sort of, the momentum just keeps going. So the campaign highlights, which I thought were interesting as well, it was not just about eating in restaurants in cities, but it's very much about how did they tie in people's perception of Australia as being, you know, the great outdoors, sea, desert, land, whatever, kangaroos, and but how do you link that to wine? Like, it's getting to people, it's for people to have a real, genuine experience out in a local community, out in the vineyard, out, you know, dining in whatever, in a rural area. So, their campaign really looked at going beyond the actual plate, but, you know, what is produced, the people, and the quirky, you know, the quirky Australians that all make this food, because it's a whole package, right? It's not just having shots, and there's research that shows that, you know, if you try to promote a country from a food and wine perspective, and then just have pictures of, like, you know, wine glasses and stuff like that, that it doesn't really resonate to people because it could be anywhere. But if you show, like those ones earlier, people sitting having a picnic in the vineyard with the glass of wine or the bottle of wine, then that's really something that speaks to people. So the results of this, increased numbers of international tourists who are spending money on food and wine experiences in Australia. They're seeing growth, they're still seeing growth. The wine industry noticed more foreign arrivals. So all good, all very expensive, and also all something that you can't just do for like 1 or 2 years. Anything related to this, building a brand image of a country, edible branding, it's something that, you know, you have to keep tweaking, seeing what's working, and our Destination Canada does this. They're always doing research, always tweaking to see what happens. And also, it's not, as you can appreciate, not a one-size-fits-all approach to each market that you're working in, because the way the way different countries, like Americans to the Brits to the French and whoever perceive Canada is, of course, different. So you have to tailor both your messaging and the types of content and the way you incentivize people to come. So some of this I have mentioned. Destination Canada, the federal marketing organization, they're the big guys for international marketing. They have a Team Canada approach. They work with all the provinces and other major stakeholders, my department, other departments. Food and drink is a pillar of their content marketing efforts, and if you look on their website, they do, and you'll see it's more and more every year about, you know, food and wine and beer and whatever, because that's what their research is showing them that people are interested in. So, and especially young people, millennials are all over that stuff. So also to support this and to support them and to support what we're doing as a government, the Minister of Small Business and Tourism launched an initiative, a request for proposals last June, I believe it was, 2017, to start working on creating, they call it Culinary tourism strategy. I told them not to call it that, but whatever. They asked for my feedback, so that's what I told them. Anyway, so they've hired someone to come up with, sort of do all the background research, do a gap analysis, see what people are saying about our country and what we can do to launch I'm not sure we would launch a program as ambitious as Australia, who knows, you never know. But anyway, to do something to capitalize on this trend. And also, just to end, Destination Canada also does their own research on the perception of food and wine travelers. And probably not surprising to you guys that food and drink in Canada is not at the top of everyone's mind right now when they think of Canada. They've done really interesting research on the US and the UK. So even though, you know, people are interested in Canada, there's still food and wine and drink is not top of mind, sorry. And it's partly due to lack of exposure. One of the things that the research has shown, and it goes back to this thing about lack of a national cuisine. So again, you can't come up with, you know, I have these discussions with people and like, what is it? Is it poutine? I'm like, really, poutine? Like, nobody even knew about poutine outside of Quebec 10 years ago. So, like, that's not our national dish, and we're not going to lead with anything like that. But anyway, once people, again, similar to the Australian experience, once people come to Canada, when they travel from the US or the UK, they are seeing that we have all these amazing food and drink experiences, and they are interested and telling their friends about it, but we still need to get the initial word out a bit more than we are already. So some of the research findings, and I know Linda is kind of standing up, so I don't no? Am I okay?
No.
Yeah, okay. Okay, you're getting nervous, okay.
We have room till 4 p.m.
Oh, okay, okay. So anyway, some of the things that they're seeing in this research that sort of speaks to people when they interviewed them and gave them sort of scenarios like, you know, what in your mind speaks to Canada and what appeals to you or would appeal to you as a food and drink tourist and entice you to come to Canada. So both the UK and the Americans were saying, you know, they're interested in what are traditional foods in our country that you can only find here. So again, stuff like, you know, game, some of the things that maybe, you know, come from the north, or the oysters that we have. I mean, recognizing that people who live nearby the border states, like in the west and the east, there will be similarities in the oysters and the fish and whatever, but you know, some not everything is the same, but it's also, it can and is prepared different due to our regional traditions. I mean, Canada is still outside of, well, there are a lot of differences between Canada, both in terms of food and wine and even regionally, and how things are prepared by chefs and the approach to food. So these are the kinds of things that we should be focusing on. And I think, again, similar to what I said about what the Australians found, that both UK and American travelers are really interested, like Canada has this, we're known for the great outdoors and nature, all these amazing things, and we are already known for that. So we have to capitalize on how do you integrate what is known about Canada to what is new about Canada. So if you combine the outside, you know, unexpected combination of nature and scenery, and like having the dinner in the Bay of Fundy when the tides go out, or having the long table dinner in Pemberton that Araxi restaurant in Whistler does every year, and these things sell out super fast, and it's not only people who are in the area, but the research is also showing that really like die-hard food and wine tourists are scanning and looking for those kind of things that, and in Ottawa this summer, where they had, you know, the longest table, or whatever they called it, on right in front of Parliament Hill. So things like that are the kind of things that, and it's not just only rural, but you can do it in an urban setting as well. So we're also known for safe food and quality food. So even though safe is sometimes associated with boring, I think it's a positive thing that we can capitalize on as well. So I will end it there, actually, but just, you know, I guess some inspiration and ideas. These are already things that we're doing in Canada. As I said, we already have a pretty well-developed infrastructure in place for food and wine tourism. It's just a lot of people outside of the country don't know about it yet. So on the left that's the long table dinner in Pemberton, in the Pemberton Valley in British Columbia, up by Whistler, that happens every year, that sells out super quick. And then on the right, some of you may recognize, that's from the Jackson Triggs concert series that happens every summer. And, you know, it's not just them, but many wineries in the region have concerts and all kinds of things to get people here, because, and that's another thing I didn't talk about that much, but you know, there's different sort of a continuum and different levels of people who are motivated by both food and wine tourism. Some just come only for that. Some come for something else, but food is important. Some might be motivated to come for music or a concert and then discover the region and the food and the wine. So, you know, it's really all about thinking how these things fit together and how we can just get people to come to the region, come to the city, have the whole package experience, because it's not and never just one isolated thing. So that's it.
Thank you, Janet. That was wonderful, fascinating. We're going to open up to the floor for some questions. For anyone joining us online or via the telephone, I've just been asked to remind you to turn on your microphone. If you do speak into it, we can hear it here, apparently. The only thing that we do ask is that you're respectful of anyone that is currently speaking at the time. So I can open the floor up now. Any questions from anybody at all for Janet? Anybody online, Sarah? Ben, that was you were going then. You haven't got a question. Okay, just scratching his head. Anybody else? Anybody online? Oh yes, sir.
Janet, are they doing any wine tourism in the Caribbean at all?
Nice.
Because there's a lot of places down there that don't know, much about Canadian wines.
Well, yeah, that's a form of sort of like having a Canadian wine festival. It's not wine tourism like to a region. We don't have that many companies that are selling in that market, some. And I know there have been a few things that have been done. Our embassy has been involved in things. They often center it around like a Canada Day celebration where they'll have a food and wine component to it. But, you know, to my knowledge, I'm not sure there are any big wine festivals or anything in the Caribbean. I know rum tourism is a thing in some of the islands.
Well, we go down to Barbados, and they have Barbados Rum, Food, and Wine Festival, and they bring in chefs from all around the world. And usually every year they've got Canadian chefs. Mark McEwen's been there a few times, Roger Luque, and they're there.
Yeah.
And it'd be nice if they could maybe say something a little bit about Canadian. Because you go in any of the wine stores down there, you're lucky, the only one wine you can buy is Inniskill and ice wine.
Yeah, well, as I said, I know it's a great idea, and they do it in Mexico and Cancun. They have a wine festival where they invite different regions and chefs as well. But I guess, you know, the thing about that is you have to I mean, the wineries have to want to go to that market, right, and be in the market, so if it makes sense for them.
Lady at the back there.
Hi, Carolyn from Westcott Danes. One great presentation, yeah, really super information. How do you take the concept of tourism? So we've got, if we're successful, if Destination Canada is successful in pressing in populations in their minds that this is a great place to come and visit for the food and wine experience, it's how do we then take that as a drive of demand for our wine back in their country? So, can you speak just a little bit about that, your experience with that in terms of how that works?
Yeah, and I think that's a very good question, and I didn't mention it, but it is something that, people come here and experience food and wine, and then they go away, and if they never see it again and never can get it, then they kind of forget about it maybe, or move on to something else, or move on to the next thing. So I think, there is a role for export of Canadian product to play, and I know, again, recognizing that the Canadian industry is small, has limited capacity, so we can't be flooding every export market, but I think, if you look at the 10 markets that Destination Canada is in, I would say about almost all of them, maybe there's a couple that we don't have Canadian wine in, or that the Canadian wine industry is interested in, but I think that's how you keep that relationship going, right? Because if people are not going to be buying direct from a winery if they come here from China or come here from France, but if they go back into their home market and see, oh, I had that Westcott Brilliance, and it'll remind them, right? And then they'll tell, and even if they don't come back, but if they're with other people, they'll say, yes, I went to, even if they didn't go to the winery, right? But yes, I went to Niagara, it was amazing, you should go. And so I think if you never have anything that leaves the country, but again, it's the industry's choice to do that, but if that's sort of like a follow-up and building on our reputation, I think that's part of the reason why France, people know about France and Italy and all these countries that export wine because we have wine in our market from them, right? And then you drink it and you think, oh my, that would be amazing to go see where the wine is made. So I definitely think it's a very, they support one another, and I think to do it and keep the momentum going, you probably have to have some Canadian wine getting out there.
Gentleman at the back.
The United States, first of all, state the reason why Canadian wineries are not flooding the market is because of the high taxes, tariffs, costs, and all the other infrastructure that the government imposes on Canadian wineries to produce a quality product. First of all, that has to change because we can flood markets. A few of us were just at a trade mission in China and Vietnam. We seen in Vietnam where it's a young emerging market with a huge middle class emerging with unbelievable disposable income and wealth. That regions where I don't feel that are as good, it could be my own objection or opinion, such as Chile, have flooded the market of Vietnam. Just saying, what I didn't see in your slide, what is the current expenditures on promoting Canadian wines globally? Like you said, like up there, it's how many tens of millions of dollars. Australia has, or Canada, or North America, what is Canada's? And in fact, I just read the news how Australia just put a complaint in against the World Trade Commission about complaining about Canadians being prejudiced that they're not letting their market over here being flooded by more Australian wines. It's getting ridiculous where the government's going to have to step in and say, listen, forget these taste Ontario, tame Ontario things, and let's go globally because I'm seeing even at the end where we're 4 years old, we get a huge influx for the United States, and they're saying, we want. Every time we try, we get shut down. It's just the borders aren't friendly, trade's not friendly, the government does not help. That's where the change has to happen. So how are we going to propose changing that?
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've done a lot of research.
So yes, you're right, we don't spend anywhere near the amount that Australia does promoting wine or food. But I think there's more interest to do so. Point taken about, I know you guys have a lot of costs to make wine. A lot of those are actually the provincial government, not the government I work for, but just saying. And the trade mission that you were on was a Government of Ontario trade mission, from what I understand. But in terms of money, I mean, it's pretty hard to put a figure on it because I know, Agriculture Canada gives money to the industry associations to do international market development, to do outbound and inbound trade missions. My department has not very much money, but that we give to our embassies so that they can host events. We do a tasting in London at Canada House every year. We've supported the Pro Wine Pavilion in Germany. We just actually did, I don't know if any of you know, but I worked with our consulate in Hong Kong and the embassy in Beijing and the consulates in Guangzhou, Chongqing, and Shanghai to do a Canadian wine sommelier competition. And we had sommeliers from each of those 5 cities compete. They did a written exam on their knowledge of Canadian wine. And there was one finalist chosen from each of the city regions who came to Hong Kong in November to do a full day of written exam, tasting, service, like a real full-blown song competition focused only on Canadian wine. And the winner, his name is Christian Zhang. He is from Shanghai, and the prize that we put together for him is a trip to come to British Columbia, Ontario, and Nova Scotia. Those were the associations that wanted to partner with us, and we partnered with Destination Canada. So the idea is to have this person come over and really get to know our industry and spend like 2 weeks here and talking winemakers and tasting. And this guy is like apparently one of the rising stars in China. And I knew as soon as I saw the first exam that they submitted the screening, and he had written like 5 times the amount of everyone else and seemed to know everything. And anyway, so it's hard to raise awareness. It's about money. I will not lie to you. It's about needing money, but it's not only about money. It's about, and what we try to do. I can't speak for everyone, but what I try to do in my job is to work with as many associations and partners as possible, like WAMO, like the British Columbia Wine Institute, Wines of Nova Scotia, Taste of Nova Scotia, Destination Canada, so we can all put together our limited resources and try to come up with something good in the end, and take advantage of the infrastructure that we still have at some of our embassies, where we have these great venues like on Trafalgar Square in London to hold a trade tasting. And there's also a cachet. People want to come to the embassy or to the ambassador's residence, right? So I'm not really answering your question, I know. But it's expensive, I know. Export is expensive. You guys face a lot of cost. You have a lot of barriers to operate in your home market. Export is not easy. You don't make the same kind of returns as you do selling from your cellar door. So that's also a challenge for a small company to decide whether or not it's important for you to have your wine in an international market. I mean, I talk to wineries all the time. Some say, you know, it's a complete waste of time, I don't care, I just want to sell out of my cellar door, whereas others, and they could be the exact same size, I'm talking about like 3,000 to 5,000 case wineries, and some, you know, they allocate half of their production to export because for them it's important to get their wine on the list at the Savoy Hotel in London, or to have their wine at the Shangri-La in Shanghai or something. So, I mean, it's, you know, it would be great if every winery had the same goal and everyone wanted to do the same thing, but everyone in this room, maybe not as, the students not as much, but if you work with the wine industry, you know that it's not uniform and it's not one size fits all. So, but I'd love to talk to you more offline about, I know your winery, I've tasted your wines. Come sell your wines through our embassy program if you'd like. So, Vlad.
I'm from Two Sisters Vineyards. I really appreciate it. Sorry for coming late. In terms of this shifting focus that I see everywhere on wine tour and tourism very much. We're realizing that we have to focus more on tourism, and we're dealing with every level of tourism association that we can right now, trying to explore what we can do. Our objective, though, is not to export, but our objective is to attract people to our cellar door. Simply, in part because Niagara is already such a magnet in other areas of Niagara Falls, in terms of getting them away from the falls into our wine regions of the peninsula and elsewhere. And so, and I've noticed that that seems to be an important shift everywhere, that all of a sudden these more culture, identity, food, wine, experiential, and the winery experience we can give allows us to attract attention. We try to use social media as well as we can. When we're developing it, we're not thinking, of course, of the foreign market. We're trying to still develop interest within our own markets. And if we're exporting anywhere, we're thinking more first of exporting into Canada, which has its own barriers that hopefully the Supreme Court decisions coming down will get rid of. But those make it even difficult to get into other provinces that we want to. And we're looking at Quebec right now, since we have demands for it. I wish, in fact, there were chances and advice for us how to use those types of social media platforms that all our wineries have, which in fact are global by definition in terms of the digital world, but how to do that to attract attention without investing a lot. And the reason we don't want to export, we export to China right now, and that's it, is simply because the margins are better at the cellar door, and that we want to see overcome very much in terms of the barriers to and the results of all that effort, and what you're going to get in the return. And that's something we don't have a lot of advice looking for. The Destination Canada, Tourism Ontario programs in terms of signature experiences is the best we can do.
So social media training focused on tourism specifically?
Well, we probably more like the Australian example that you showed was really, and I really noted that. Where's the Canadian data to help us make those decisions?
There is some Canadian data. It's not all yet been released publicly, and it's not all as specific like the Australians did, but I think, toward the end of the presentation when I was talking about Destination Canada is doing the research, this new development of a culinary tourism strategy, which is still, the contract was just awarded, I think mid-December or something. So, but hopefully within 6 months' time, we're gonna start to see some of this stuff coming out and then hopefully shared with stakeholders so that you guys can get something from it so that you can know how to tailor your social media, because as you said, social media, you have to do it right but it also can be quite an inexpensive way of doing something if you know what you're doing, so.
And the second point is what you said. The argument we continually having is that getting some of our product abroad, not necessarily to kind of help the bottom line, but to be in the right places. As you talked about, you know, this hotel in London, this hotel in China. Does that really make a difference? Does it really, really make a difference in terms of the size of the market and how many wines from around the world are zipping around? And if we're not known already abroad and appreciated, therefore, isn't the first one, I guess it is for them to taste our wine and realize we're making great wine, but, you know, and to get to a small amount of wine, to get it in the right places, whether it's New York, London, where else does it help?
I hear from wineries that it does help, and that the wineries who have been successful in markets like New York and London, and it's not only about getting the wine on the list, but once you have distribution, you have someone like the writer from the New York Times or the Financial Times writing about your region, which has, even if you're not selling a lot there, it has a halo effect, and people are like, whoa, Canada, let's go, even if you can't get it.
I guess it all adds to the reputation, a wine region's reputation.
And it adds to your reputation in your local market.
Yeah,
and
people
the
use it
Toronto
for that.
crowd has been ignoring us, for a decade, while we've been slowly making fantastic wines, but they read about us in the New York Times, and all of a sudden they give a shit,
Yeah.
right? So it's I think you can't underestimate the next story from but to be blunt, like our local market doesn't give us the respect that we deserve in this province or across the country, and so it's just getting that external validation is huge.
Canadians are not successful until they're successful somewhere else.
But
It's sad, but it's true.
But how best to do that? I mean, the New York Times article that we're all talking about from last week, why go through a small distribution abroad? Why don't we just target the thought leaders, the journalists directly, pay for them to come here and go back, and then they'll talk about it without having to kind of get your wine exported and second label put on and blah, blah, blah.
Well, two reasons. I mean, we have been doing that. If you look at things like I4C, we have, not we, but WAMO and I4C have been bringing in thought leaders, and I think we're getting some traction because of that. But also, thought leaders, if you mean media don't really want to write about wines that are not available in the market or they may write about them once and then they're not going to write about them again because they have all their readers writing to them, oh great, but I can't get this wine, so who cares? So I've heard it from them directly, and this is what wineries tell me, right? I mean,
just one last question, actually for me. Well, I was quite interested to know, because it's something we talk about at Fizz Club, is the impact of Canadian wines in international sparkling wine competitions where we win platinum, gold, trophy, silver, etc. on then doing events and international reputation, I guess, to a certain extent, but also export.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think about that kind of stuff all the time. I think it depends on the competition where they win, because as you know, there's a hierarchy of competitions. I think it also depends on how the producer or the region uses the results, because I know, some, you can look at all kind of wine associations and they list all the competitions that their wineries win, and it's like, oh, like you could read it for days, right? But it becomes a bit meaningless, I think, unless you do something with it. But, I've also heard from producers who are active in certain markets that it does make a difference in terms of maybe opening a door when they're talking to a distributor or maybe a buyer, a retail buyer, but you know, sommeliers, like, they don't care about competition. It's the trade doesn't. So, but I think, you know, that's a very good point, that I think it is a way that we can use those results to generate more interest in the region and the products. And for sparkling wine.
Absolutely, that's what we've been talking about in Fizz Club. Anybody else? I've got away from Sarah.
Does anyone else online want to ask a question?
Is there anyone online still? Yep. I've got a no. Okay, well, we'll bring that to a close. Thank you so much, Janet. We've got a little present for you. Fascinating hot topic there. And next week our lecture series continues with me. And I will be discussing how method, timing and severity of leaf removal impacts Cabernet Franc wine flavour. So I'll see some of you, all of you, and those of you online next week. Thank you very much.